Good, thank you. Yeah, I'm David, and let me just give you the 30-second overview of what Dubbit is, just because you'll find that good things come in threes, that the way our company is structured actually affects the way that we're looking at virtual reality right now. So we are a strategy consultancy, a research consultancy, and a digital studio. And in the digital studio, we're building games, apps, virtual worlds, and starting to build in virtual reality as well now, and that's going to come into play here. So let's get rid of the elephant in the room, and that is that virtual reality isn't for kids, right? Most of the devices that are out there right now talk about 12 plus, 13 plus. Even Google Cardboard has in its instructions that kids should use it with the supervision of an adult. And we've all seen images like this of kids who are, sort of so wrapped up in the virtual experience, that adults too, for that matter, that they lose track of where they are and what they're doing. But I'm going to contend that this is actually a good thing, that we're still very reticent about VR for kids, because I've been in this business, children's media, for a very long time. And I have seen, not as long as what I'll describe here, mind you, but I've seen for almost every technology that gets introduced to the consumer market, we first market it to families with kids and say how good it's going to be for children. Television came along. You got to get a television set because your kids are going to learn so much from TV. Color TV. Imagine when they can see the world in color. Computers, you got to get a computer or your kid's going to be left behind. The internet, tablets, everything that comes along. We sell it first on the basis of what it'll do for kids. And then as soon as the market is saturated with hardware, kids, yeah, they're important, but we don't make as much money on them as we do otherwise. So this is a case with virtual reality where it's been coming along for so long, and it's been sort of in development. We know enough about it, and they're not the primary market now. So we have time to be thoughtful about what virtual reality should be and will be for kids. We know they're going to be using it, so let's be thoughtful about the uses and content of it. So I mentioned good things come in threes. Dubbit is taking a three-prong approach to development of virtual reality. We are conducting research, and that's probably the area where I spend most of my time. We're conducting research. We've done some already with the Oculus Rift into how kids between the ages of 7 and 13 manage it well. And I'll show you some of the data from that in a minute. How comfortable is it? How engaged are they? And then what do they want to do with it? Once they've had that experience, what do kids want to do in virtual reality? We're about to launch a major study actually with pediatricians, psychologists, optometrists, child development experts, that's going to get us at what are best practices in virtual reality for kids. In production, we've done some animation already as sort of proof of concept. I'll show you one in just a second that is available on the App Store. We've done another for the HTC Vive that's more just a demonstration of what's possible. And for the Australian Rules Football League, we are producing live action VR that will let kids go into the locker room, go into the tunnel leading out to the field, go onto the pitch with their favorite players. So we're producing in it. And then in distribution, we're already part owners of something called We Are VR. That's a neutral platform for distributing VR content. It's not just Dubbit content, and it's for all different devices. And within the last couple weeks, we launched Bogglebox, which is a kid-specific VR download site. And you'll see a little bit of that in just a second. And that is our feeling. Well, I'll tell you about it when I get there. So here's the research agenda that I talked about. We looked at comfort, we looked at ease of use, we looked at usability, engagement, and I'm going to get to some of the data about what kids felt they wanted from VR and how they liked it. We also wanted to know how do they differentiate this from other gaming platforms so that we can start to think about what can you do in VR that you can't do anywhere else. And as I say, we're now engaging in this discussion with experts, with academics and physicians to try to get deeper into this question of responsible use of VR. So this is the animated game that we built, and in this one, cows fly airplanes because of course cows fly airplanes, and they're trying to. You'll see some aliens appear in a minute, and the cow's job is to shoot down the aliens in order to protect them from rustling their cattle. We're really just producing at this point for our own information to figure out what's possible, how do you build quality in this, and start to look at what's going to be, how do you adapt models from other forms for kids in this space. This one obviously without hand controls for cardboard, you're shooting things down by staring at them. I mentioned the distribution platform. This is what Bogglebox looks like. You just scan side to side while you're in the VR experience, and you can see the different titles pop up. You stare at one and it'll launch so that you go straight into it. The reason we're doing Bogglebox, the reason we've launched this VR site for kids is because I mentioned before about how things get marketed to children first and then the content for kids disappears. If parents don't feel there's content that they're comfortable with for virtual reality for kids, they're not going to let their kids play in it. They're not going to buy the devices. They're not going to want to see their kids in it. And the whole market for that would fall apart before it even has a chance to get going. So really, we feel like if there's a curator who says, these are things we've vetted using our experience of what's good for kids, that we can help make parents more comfortable with it. So now I want to go into 5 different areas where we feel, and I should warn you, I should have warned you at the beginning, there are going to be more questions than answers here. It's still so early in the kids in VR process that there's more we don't know than what we do know. So I'm going to try to lay out some of the questions. Where we do know something, I'll tell you what we know. But really, I want to get you thinking, as you start to think about kids in VR, about what the key considerations and questions are. And the first revolve around physiology. Devices, for the most part, were made for adult heads. Kids' eyes are closer together. The interpupillary distance really matters when you're working in virtual reality. If you are off on that, that's one of the things that can contribute to feeling sick. So we really need to think about adjustable gear for kids, and there are some versions of cardboard out now where you can adjust the distance between the eyepieces. But we need to think about how to ensure that we make devices that are suitable to kids' heads. Nearsightedness, this is why we're talking to optometrists. What is the effect of convincing kids' brains that what they are seeing in the deep, that they're seeing something in the deep distance that's actually less than an inch from their eyes? And then motion sickness. We've really solved a lot of the problems around motion sickness right now that have to do mainly with processor speed and with some of the understanding some of the production values. Let me share a little of what we've learned in production about what helps prevent motion sickness in a VR environment. You really want to keep kids' heads at a comfortable level. You want to keep them fairly level. You can go, we've found really to 15% is a pretty comfortable range up and down. 15% from level is a pretty comfortable range. 30% you can do reasonably well. Once you get to a 60% angle, that's when kids, you can really only use it very occasionally and only for kind of special effects. If you really need to demonstrate something that's high, low, that's when you can use it. But by the time you get to straight up or straight down, first of all, that often exceeds the possibilities of the device. But second of all, that's where you start to get some dizziness, some discomfort. And besides, since kids are disembodied in most of these things, if they're looking 90 degrees down, they're not going to see legs. They're going to, and that alone is kind of a disorienting experience. A lot of things that you might normally in a game build on a horizontal plane that you might be looking down at the ground to do, that takes you beyond that 60-degree mark. So we've found that you really have to try to port those to a vertical plane, to do them on a wall instead of looking down at the ground. So here you can see it mapping on a wall instead of on the ground. And then also the speed at which something travels across the screen really makes a difference in how comfortable kids feel. Around 0.75 seconds to traverse 90 degrees across a screen is really pretty much ideal. That if you get too much slower than that, it's a very slow track. And if you get much faster than that, you're jerking their heads around and that leads to some discomfort. So those are some of the production things we've learned. I mentioned that we'd done some research on Oculus and comfort and engagement. This Jackson Pollock slide here is comfort by age. So we were testing with boys and with girls ages 7 to 12. And what I want you to take from this, I mean, look at the the groupings of it now. Look at the overall effect, and then I'm going to switch to the average so that you can see it a little more clearly. We did find girls dropped out sooner than boys. The longest usage time was about 19 minutes, and what they were doing here was playing a sequence of games. So they would play each game for a few minutes, a new game would come up, and you can see that a little bit even in the comfort, that every time the game changes, there's a little bit of a moment of having to recover. The boys played longer than girls. It was purely a matter of engagement. The girls kind of lost interest, and that may be the games that were selected for it. So here's the average. You can see the ramp up on comfort is actually quite steep. They become comfortable with the VR really quickly and are able to use it well. And again, they're looking around, they're using their eyes to scan things, they're using their eyes as triggers. This was with Oculus. And they maintain that comfort for quite a while. You get to around 12 or 13 minutes though, and there's a point where they start to fatigue. Now, if they keep going, they do kind of recover some, but I think what this says to us is that experiences in VR for kids, at least for the time being, are most likely to be short-term experiences. I don't think we're gonna see kids, you may have heard Jen McLean this morning talking about her tween daughter and disappearing under a headset and worrying about them spending hours sort of isolated in that world. I don't think we're going to see that for the time being. I think we're likely to see much shorter experiences. One of my favorite things I've seen in VR right now is there's a 1.5-minute video online. I decided I didn't have time to include it here, from Google Expeditions, where they show how you might use VR in a classroom. And I think it's brilliant in that in a 1.5 minutes they show how a teacher would set up a VR experience with the curriculum in the teaching, would then ask the kids to raise the Google Cardboard and engage in the experience, and then they show how coming out of that you use the curriculum to ask questions, to have them look for things that you'll quiz them about or you'll discuss with them later. So I think short experiences are going to be the driver for the time being. Second area, psychology. Telepresence replaces television. What does it mean when you are actually in the experience? What does it do to a child's psychology when they're in the experience, not watching it from afar? The biggest one for me, at what age can kids tell the difference between a virtual experience and a real experience? The Stanford VR lab has done some work around this even a couple years ago with kids ages 4 to 7 roughly, and found that if you tell kids a story about something that ostensibly happened to them, that didn't really happen, and then you let some of them engage in a VR experience where they kind of see that happening in virtual reality, and then bring them back a week later, the kids who experienced it in virtual reality believe that it happened in real life. They'd been told this story that happened in real life. They've now seen themselves doing it in a virtual setting. They believe it. The ones who did not see it in the virtual reality setting were much more likely to see it as a fantastic experience, a fantasy experience. Empathy is one of the biggest areas where I think we have potential for virtual reality to tell a different kind of story from what we tell using other media. One of the experiences that's out there right now, not necessarily aimed at kids, puts you waiting for a food truck in a refugee village, in a refugee camp. The food truck comes up and you are in the middle of that crowd that is trying to get to the food before it runs out. That's a very different feeling from just watching that in a newsreel. Kids today, you look at all kinds of research about what kids need today, and empathy and understanding, mutual understanding, is so critical to 21st century learning that if we can use virtual reality to promote that, it's all to the good. Supporting kids with autism, we're already seeing some examples of that, where you allow children to rehearse social situations that they find very difficult in the real world. If they can rehearse them in a virtual world where there are not the same consequences for them, then maybe they can take that into the real world and feel more confident. And then focus and meditation. If you go around to a lot of the game settings here, so many games are designed to get you hopped up, to get to get you moving, to get you to promote sort of pulse and action. Some of the best VR experiences I've seen so far are designed to do just the opposite. They're designed to calm you. They're designed to where the more you settle into the experience, the more you lean back and breathe, the better the experience becomes of your exploring the world around you. Play patterns. If there's any one sentence to take away from this presentation, this is the one. It's child development doesn't change over time. The context in which children develop is what changes. Children go through the same developmental patterns that they have for centuries. They have to learn the same things at roughly the same progression, roughly the same age. But think of how the context has changed, not only with VR, but just in the past couple decades. How do we take those classic play patterns that are part of development and incorporate them into virtual reality? And what that means to me is, what can you do in VR that is not possible in any other medium or better in the real world that promotes those play patterns? How do you give agency to kids? They want to be in charge of play. How do you allow them to do that in a virtual environment? How do you safely incorporate movement? You saw that slide I used at the beginning where the girl is falling over, and we've probably all seen the video where the kid is holding the hand controllers while in a VR experience. And there's a desk in the VR world, and they see the desk and they put down the hand controllers, and there's no desk there. It's only in the virtual world. So how do you let kids move around in a world without endangering them? And then what will co-play be like? Kids, you'll see in just a second, one of the things that kids want most in VR play is to be able to join with others. They don't want it to be a solitary experience. What does that mean in a virtual environment? I've seen some video from, I think it was Facebook, of in London, a sort of social VR experience where this head kind of pops into your field of vision and trades information with you and can hand you pictures and things like that. And I actually found that to be a little bit spooky, this sort of disembodied head that comes into your field of vision. Kids want to be able to play with each other in those classic play patterns that they've always had. How do we give that to them? So here's what we found in our Oculus testing about what works and what doesn't. And the ones that I want to focus on, active experiences over observations. If you've played in VR, you've probably been presented at some point with a roller coaster. Roller coasters are sort of the classic VR experience. Kids got pretty bored with that. They said, I want to be able to do something from the roller coaster. Maybe I can shoot at something, maybe I can take pictures, maybe give me something to do. Don't just have me sitting here on the rails with no control over it. And then the one that I thought was really perceptive of kids is they did not feel it would be good for games where you have to change perspective. They cited FIFA, soccer in particular, where as you pass the ball around, your perspective on the field changes. They recognized right away that would not be a comfortable experience in virtual reality. You need smoothness. You need to be the center of it, not to constantly be jarred around from place to place. They did like it better than other controllers. Once they got used to it, they said, "Oh, I would want to play in this more than other games." When we asked them what they would make, a lot of really predictable things. They want to play superheroes. They want to play in Minecraft. All the kids want to play in Minecraft in virtual reality. But their answer to this thing I was talking about a minute ago about FIFA was they could see a soccer mini game where they get to do a shootout, where they either get to kick the ball or they get to be the goalie, because that's one where you have a single perspective, but where being immersed in it, having 360 motion and vision would really make a difference for them. And then they wanted to do theme parks, sim apps, and things like that. I think my favorite one were the kids who said, we want to play Angry Birds, but we want to be the bird. We want to fly through the air and smash through the wall and see what we can do there. So they got immediately this idea that VR is a medium in which you can take perspectives you can't take in any other platform and really be immersed in them. They also went straight to education. When we asked, what do you want to do in virtual reality? What they want to do is enhance their learning. And there were 3 ways they want to do that. If they are studying ancient Rome, they want to be inside the Colosseum. They want to be able to explore it on their own. They want to be able to turn 360. They want to be able to walk through and look behind things. Then there's what I call the you can't get there from here category. Places that you could go in the real world, but their class is unlikely to be able to pick up and go to. So I want to be in the rainforest. I want to be in the middle of the rainforest. And then there's the you can't do that in real life. So many kids said, we want to go through the digestive system in virtual reality. Exactly what you would expect a kid, middle school kid to, or grade and middle school kid to go to, is we want to go through the body. Creative models. I love this quote from a colleague of mine about VR being a canvas of space as well as, where video is a canvas of time. It kind of changed immediately how I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it, VR still in a very linear form, and it really is not. And that's, you'll see one of the questions that I'm working on right now that is, so what are going to be the killer apps? We suddenly saw what an AR killer app looks like with Pokemon Go in the last week. What is the Pokemon Go of virtual reality? And I don't think we know yet. But I can tell you that the one thing I haven't seen at least, and maybe some of you have, is the sticky app that you not only want to stay with, but you want to keep coming back to. I mentioned roller coasters before. I'll ride a VR roller coaster once, twice. I don't really want to come back and do it 20 times. What is it that's going to bring kids back over and over again? How are we going to let them explore in ways that change each time they come back? Or at the very least where we can add content over time, add episodes, add new approaches. What's going to let them play it in a couple different ways so that once they've been through the whole game or story, they don't say, okay, I've done that. Because the fastest thing that's going to kill VR is if parents pay for a game or an app and the kid comes back 20 minutes later and says, okay, I'm done, I'm bored. What's narrative going to look like in virtual reality? It's a whole new challenge for a director from trying to direct for the flat screen when you are at the center, you are the cameras effectively. This to me is the toughest and most interesting one, and in fact in November in London I'm collaborating with YouTube Kids to put on an event at the YouTube space in London where we're going to basically do an open mic night and invite people who are producers for virtual reality already, people who are producers for television, people who are producers for YouTube, and invite them to just tell us where they see narrative going in virtual reality. How do you create a story? How do you cue children to what's going on the screen around them when they are at the center as opposed to having the canvas of a screen to work with? And then how will kids migrate between VR and other platforms? One of we've seen in Dubbett's research, more and more kids are being drawn to the tablet and the phone. You all know this, you've all seen this. If they're using one device that does everything, how do you get them to put that down and go over and pick up the VR headset? If it's built around the phone, if it's the gear or cardboard, that incorporates the phone, but still, it's another piece of equipment that they've got to shift to. So how are we going to get them to make that shift? The marketplace. Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford, I love this quote. If you show me 20 ideas, I'll say 19 of them would be better in another medium. How is VR going to come into our homes? What devices are we likely to have? Is it going to be a robust hardware market? Are there going to be a lot of people creating this, or are we really going to see a sorting out of that? How are parents going to pay for this? We have, you've had 3 days here of people saying there are no good sustainable financial models for children's media. Almost everything has its own flaws. Subscription, you start to get subscription fatigue. Outright purchase, will parents pay enough to make it sustainable? In-app purchase, is that fair to kids? How is this going to work in the VR world? I suspect it's going to be some form of subscription model or outright purchase, but that's going to be, given the cost involved and the newness of the medium, that's going to be quite a sell. And then what's the content creator business model? That's what you're all here to find out. We are finding, I mentioned before that we were doing some work with the Australian Rules Football League. They are approaching it as we're going to brand hundreds of thousands of cardboard viewers. We're going to give them to our best fans. We're going to put them in our fan stores. And then we're going to provide, and we'll sell them, and we'll provide them with, and then we'll provide them with the content. So they see the financial model as being more wrapped up in the hardware than the software. But that takes us right back up to the first question of how many times can you go out to an experience, a game, a play, whatever, and come back with a cardboard viewer before you start to say, wait a minute, I've got a stack of these here. I really think cardboard is the game changer. I think that this is why all the efforts of the past decades where VR has been the next great thing are really going to come to pass right now. I think it's cardboard, and I think it's because it's so inexpensive. You see, you've probably read about McDonald's giving away cardboard viewers with Happy Meals. That box in the upper left corner, the Nutrigrain box, that's from Kellogg, New Zealand, where they built their boxes so that you could cut them and fold them into a VR viewer. So suddenly the cost of virtual reality participation is down to the cost of a box of cereal. And then there are codes on the side of the box that you can order from. Processing speeds in phones are up to a point right now where it's really quite practical. You get a very satisfying experience from a cardboard viewer. And the psychology of parenting. It is a lot easier to see your kids holding up a cardboard viewer that they can take away if they're not comfortable or not having a good time, that is low cost, and that than to see them strapped into a more immersive technology. I heard someone on a panel earlier today say, people are not going to spend the $700 for a device or the $700 plus $1,000 for the computer to run it without going out and getting cardboard first and making sure they like the experience. So cardboard is the gateway. How cheap has cardboard gotten? Not only can you use it, you can eat it after you're done. This is from Make Magazine. You can make your own cardboard viewer out of graham crackers and frosting. That's what I've got for you today. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions if we still have time.
We have a couple of minutes, I think. Anybody have any questions?
I was just curious if you're looking at AR too, or what draws you more to VR for kids, or do you see the two paths crossing down the road?
I suspect AR will be faster to really flourish. The Pokemon Go experience is a pretty good indication of that, but the sort of cost of entry is less, at least for phone level AR. Whether the HoloLens and things like that, they'll take a while as well. The research we're doing now is more built around VR because of the cautions that have been issued about kids. But there's a lot about AR that fascinates me. And one of the things that I take away from the Pokemon Go experience, I would love to see AR used for kids to be able to tell stories, tell their own stories, and tie them to places in the real world. The way that the Pokestops use landmarks, I would love to see kids be able to go to landmarks where something happened to them, where they are, tell the story of a piece of art, tell the story of when they first did a trick on the skateboard at the skateboard park, and tag it to that place so that other kids could come along and find it.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Great. Thanks.
Well, great. Thank you, David.
Thank you much.